Whenever we get towards the end of October, we're getting really close to Election Day, and there are a few races out there that we're watching really closely. And one is in New Jersey and one is in Virginia. And I know everybody across the country is aware of these races, but they also will say something about what we might expect in the midterms. We love to read these tea leaves as we get excited for a big midterm year coming in 2026. So I am really thrilled because we have two of our best reporters on this beat with us today. Bryan Llenas is reporting on the governor's race in New Jersey between Mikey Sherrill and Jack Ciattarelli, and he is in Tenafly, New Jersey today. Rich Edson joins us from Winchester, Virginia, on the Virginia race, I should say, which is also getting really interesting between the Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears and Allison Spanberger, Congresswoman and former CIA special agent. So great to have you both with us today. Hi, guys.
Hey, Martha. Good to be here.
So let's just start. Let's start in New Jersey with you, Bryan. Give us a sense of what's happening on the ground, because I live in New Jersey. I see a lot of Ciattarelli signs out there. The race has been tightening. One of the interesting data points that I'm watching is that Kamala Harris won New Jersey, as we've seen in presidential races for some time, but she only won it by 6 points. So we have seen a tightening. And Jack Ciattarelli, this is the third time he's running for governor of New Jersey. So this time, name recognition is not a big issue for him. Everybody knows who he is. Give us your sense of how this is shaping up. Is it tightening? And what are you seeing on the ground?
Well, Martha, I think it is tightening. The sense on the ground is that there is an engagement in this race in an off year, not a presidential year. There's engagement in this gubernatorial race that they have not seen before. Now, a big part of that is what you just spoke about. The reality is that President Trump performed amazing here in 2024 compared to what he did in 2020. And he really opened the eyes of many Republicans who now view New Jersey, which is a historically blue state, as perhaps in play to one day be red. Now, he cut the margin here in 2024 by 10 points. So he lost this state by 16 points. Harris won it only by 6 points in 2024. So what you have here is Republican Jack Ciattarelli, who's run 3 times, but this is the first time that he has run as a pro-Trump candidate. He is really walking a fine line here. He is trying to energize the MAGA base here by running as a pro-Trump candidate. But at the same time, he needs to make sure that he wins over independent voters in what is a historically blue state. There are 850,000 more registered Democrats than there are Republicans. So there is a real interest here about making sure that there is excitement. And I think his campaign, by leaning in on the Trump side of this, is getting the kind of excitement that he did not see the first 2 times he ran. The big question here is whether or not Democrat Mikey Sherrill and her attacks calling him a MAGA candidate are going to work enough. Are they going to drive enough Democrats to the polls here in New Jersey to stop Ciattarelli for a third time?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, when you look at New Jersey's past, it's been a while, but Chris Christie, we had a Republican governor, 2-term Republican governor in Chris Christie, and we have a long history of other Republican governors, Christie Todd Whitman, you have Tom Kean. So there have been a lot of times, even though it's been a blue state for a long time, when we have seen that desire for perhaps, fiscal stability, that kind of thing that has prompted people towards Republican candidates. Now, here's Jack Ciattarelli on America's Newsroom. Let's listen to this.
Trump was up 31 points with the Latino community. He was up 16 points with the black community. And as I said, we've seen an overwhelmingly positive reception for my candidacy in those communities all throughout New Jersey. So that's another reason why I'm very positive about the outcome of this race.
So that's the question. You make a great point, Bryan. 850,000 is the Democrat advantage in voters in New Jersey. Very tough to overcome. But he's arguing that some of those people are voting for him.
Yeah, that's because Jack Ciattarelli is campaigning in places that Republicans typically have not, and that is the urban areas. You know, President Trump in 2024 had massive double-digit improvements in Latino majority communities here. In fact, in all 21 plus Latino majority municipalities in New Jersey, President Trump improved. And so Jack Ciattarelli is trying to ride that momentum. They think that they can cut into the Democratic advantage with minority voters. And, you know, I'm in Tenafly, New Jersey. There is a huge Jewish population in Bergen County. That's where I'm at. And I spoke to half a dozen New Jersey voters in just the last couple of hours, and all of them say that anti-Semitism and what's happening just across the river in New York with Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani is pushing Jewish voters towards Ciattarelli, that they are scared. So, look, in a race that was decided by just 80,000 votes in 2021 when Ciattarelli lost that race, all of these minority voters, right, it's the margins that can really matter here. And that's why we've seen Cheryl, who hasn't really gone out to try to win independents necessarily or even Republicans. She is campaigning to try to make sure that Democrats show up. Democrats have voiced their concern that there isn't the kind of enthusiasm they need for her to win, to get black and Latino voters to show up. And now you've got potentially an issue with Jewish voters as well with what's happening just across the Hudson River. And so that is why the Republicans are feeling optimistic, cautiously optimistic at that, heading into Election Day.
Yeah, so interesting. Mamdani across the river, and a lot of people in New Jersey, like myself, spend almost half of our lives at work in New York. We go, we consider ourselves part of this major metropolitan area, and they're watching what's happening in New York and saying, do we need a balance to that out in New Jersey? Let's bring in Rich Edson, and we'll go back around the horn in a moment, Bryan. Rich, give us the contours of what you're seeing here. And actually, let's start with this soundbite from Winsome Earl-Sears, the lieutenant governor under Glenn Youngkin. She's calling out Allison Spanberger here for backtracking on the Virginia redistricting issue, and then we'll get your take on the race.
Abigail Spanberger is on record publicly just this summer promising she would not take up redistricting. This, my friends, is not about party, it's about principle. The voters created the Independent Redistricting Commission. Only the voters have the right to decide its future, not gerrymandering Democrats.
So a lot of interesting issues in this Virginia race, Rich. Tell us how you see it. How does it stand now?
Yeah, absolutely, Martha. And a lot of them are national in sense, like this redistricting wave that's now hit Virginia, just like it's hit Texas, and yesterday it moved to Kansas, and it moved to other states as well. We tried to ask Abigail Spanberger this morning about those remarks, what Winsome Earl-Sears had to say yesterday, the lieutenant governor here, in those remarks you just played from Richmond. Initially, she didn't comment. She wouldn't talk to us earlier today, but she did give an interview later on to the Associated Press in which she said she would not oppose that effort in the Virginia House to move that bill through to give Virginia the option of redistricting and perhaps redistrict out as many as 3 Republican seats in this state. So there are a number of national trends that are moving through Virginia. That's just one of them. You have to remember there's also a large footprint, especially in Northern Virginia, of federal government workers. And in her remarks earlier today and later this afternoon and in places all across the Commonwealth, Abigail Spanberger has focused on the DOGE cuts. She has focused on the White House. She has focused on what is going on in Congress. Not to say that she's not as focused on her opponent, Winsome Earl-Sears, but there is a real national flavor to this race. And you get the sense that Spanberger in a lot of the polls have shown her up several points. She's acting like that. She's not really taking many unscripted moments on the campaign trail. And so that's largely what we've seen thus far today and throughout the last couple of weeks from the Spanberger campaign in this race.
Yeah, it's interesting. In both of these races, it's really testimony to the fact that after Labor Day, these races, people start to pay attention. And then obviously in the final weeks, we see that these races can move. And in both of these states, in New Jersey and Virginia, you were about 10 points apart in these races. And now it's a lot closer as we get closer. But I think the point, Rich, that you make about the expansion basically of Washington, D.C. Into Virginia and how many government workers work, and the government has grown exponentially in the past 20 years. And most of them live in Virginia. So when they start seeing DOGE cuts and when they start hearing the president and his team talking about cutting more jobs as part of the shutdown, do you think that could be the issue that helps Spanberger if she does win?
It's a large part of it. And I'll tell you one thing. If you look at the top tax rate in the District of Columbia or Maryland, basically your other two options, if you live in D.C., you're going to live in Virginia if you care about what your top tax rate is. The number that the Spanberger campaign cites, and there are different calculations of this, it's in the hundreds of thousands. She says about 320,000 federal workers. And it's not just direct federal workers, it's federal contractors on top of that, and then all the businesses that feed off of that. So you have a massive employer like the federal government, and then a number of agencies that are also housed in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's a huge impact. But there's also the effect, and you talk about how it was in New Jersey. I remember, in fact, I grew up the next town over from where Bryan's standing right now. Tenafly was our rival in high school. I grew up in Dumont, which is right up Knickerbocker Road from where Bryan's standing.
Exactly.
So, but you look at Jersey, right? The effect there is Kane in the 80s, Whitman in the 90s, Christie after that. There's always a back and forth. Virginia only get one term, and that's a sense that's going on here too. You have a Republican in the White House, you have a Republican in the State House here, and the conditions are usually thus that you're going to put a Democrat likely in the Virginia governor's mansion from here. And so they're not only looking at can Spanberger win, but to send a national message, that campaign really wants to not run up the score, but not win by a very small margin here. And that's the sense here as well, that, given what's gone on in the federal government, given the DOGE cuts, given the federal government presence in Virginia, this should be not a cakewalk, but it shouldn't be that close of a race for her. At least that's the prevailing theory.
Quick question for you about Jay Jones, the Attorney General candidate, because nobody expected that this was going to be part of the equation here, but he said these horrible things about wanting to see the death of the top Democrat legislator in Virginia and his family as well. The man stood on stage and said, I feel terrible about this. A lot of people said, at some point, comments might make you want to drop out, but he didn't. But that race with Jason Miyares, who's a well-liked attorney general in Virginia, raises the question of what draw that might have on Spanberger and whether or not you're going to see a lot of split voting in this state. What's your sense of whether or not people are going to split that vote?
Absolutely. And it's funny, you stand in the back of these events, you talk to a number of reporters, they're all saying, I can't believe I've spent this much time covering the state attorney general's race. Yeah. But not only has that race really been that much more newsworthy because of those texts and comments, but because it's bled into every other race in this state. Every other Virginia Democrat has been asked about those texts. And for the most part, the vast majority of those Democrats have said, I abhor those texts. They are terrible text messages. I condemn those text messages, but I will not call for Jay Jones to drop her out of the race. That's because early voting had already started. So they would essentially be conceding the Attorney General's race if they decide to say Jay Jones get out of the race. But the problem is now you have a number of Democrats who are basically saying those comments are okay with this particular candidate because we don't want to give up an Attorney General's race.
So, Bryan, it's interesting. Early voting underway both in Virginia and now in New Jersey as well. And you can mail in ballot in New Jersey also. I'm curious, when you're on the ground and you see, the people who show up for these various events, what do you think is sort of the perhaps untold story, which is the name of this podcast? So we try to dig into kind of what's going on that people aren't talking about. What are people not noticing in the race that you're covering more closely than anyone?
I can say that there are these periphery issues. There are these issues that I think could make all the difference in turnout on the Republican side that may not be talked about. Things like the plastic bags. I can't tell you how many people have talked about how much they want their plastic bags back in New Jersey.
Yeah, put me on that list.
Things like the plastic bags. You've got the windmills along the Jersey Shore. You've got the school issues that aren't being talked about as much. Parents who want to be able to decide more in their schools, particularly in New Jersey, where they're paying the highest property taxes in the nation. That's not the top issue that's being talked about. Affordability is the high cost of living. But it's these other things that I think are really playing a factor for folks who may be in the middle. And, I also got to think, the reality is that this is a purple state when it comes to gubernatorial elections. And so you guys mentioned, looking at history, I do find it fascinating that whoever wins this race will make history. I mean, the last time that a Republican won the gubernatorial election with a Republican in the White House was 1985 in New Jersey. That was Tom Kaine. But the last time that a Democrat won 3 governor's races in a row was 1961. So you've got history working against both candidates here. And I think at the end of the day, Chitterelli's closing message, I'm a Jersey guy. You know, I'm from here. I've got 100 years of family history here. Cheryl is from Virginia. Murphy is from Massachusetts. Him going to diners, him talking about some of these other issues like the plastic bags could make the difference here in what is expected to be a close race. And so we'll see.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see if that reverbs in New York as well. I think we don't have a full sense of that, but we will see. So, Rich, what's the untold story in the Virginia race that you noticed that maybe people aren't talking about in the headlines?
I think it's education, and it's only because it played such an enormous role 4 years ago to help get Glenn Youngkin elected for his term as governor. And remember, you only get one term. He's not running for re-election because you can't run for 2 consecutive terms in Virginia. He beat Terry McAuliffe, and it was very much on an interview that McAuliffe had given on education and what parents' role in their children's education should be. One of the main questions that came up at the debate that these 2 candidates had in this race was about whether those who are trans athletes, those who are born boys, can participate in girls' sports. An unequivocal answer given by Winsome Earl-Sears. Abigail Spanberger gave a very long answer that basically ended up with it should be based on communities and school districts and parents all working together to try to figure out what the best answer can be. Whether or not those types of issues still resonate 4 years later and still resonate with those 2 candidates. It's a lot of the criticism that you've seen on some of these answers that Spanberger has given, and whether, you know, that's sort of the texting fight that you saw with Jay Jones has overtaken that really as sort of like the big issue that we had as an unexpected issue in this campaign. But you know, there are still these other education type cultural issues that are simmering under the surface, and it remains to be seen how much that's really going to show up in the poll numbers here.
Well, for reporters who love to cover elections, there's nothing more exciting than kind of the air outside around the places that you guys are. The leaves are turning. It's a little bit chilly today in New Jersey for sure, and probably in Virginia. And you've got that excitement and the buzz as you watch these candidates sprint to the close and try to knock each other out of these races. It feels like the Democrats feel pretty okay about Virginia at this point. So it's going to be very interesting to see if there's an upset. I feel like, based on what you guys are saying and what I've heard, that in New Jersey, people feel a little bit more strongly that Chitterelli may be able to pull it off. He has big support from the RNC and from Trump, Bryan, right? I mean, there's big money pouring into this race. Real quick before I let you guys get back on the campaign trail.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's over $200 million that are being spent on this governor's race, and you've got the RNC engaged in a way that they haven't been. I think the big thing to be looking at here with numbers real quick, Martha, is that there's no doubt Democrats will have an advantage, 200,000 plus advantage heading into Election Day because Democrats love to vote early. Let's make sure from the Republican side, from what I've been told, they say that they need to make sure that doesn't go up more than 300,000, that advantage stays between 200, 250,000, less than 300,000 heading into Election Day, because if not, you could be looking at a too steep of a hill to overcome on Election Day for Republicans. Martha.
But very quickly, Rich, Winsome Sears would be the first black woman governor in the United States. She started off a little rocky in this race. How have you watched her kind of grow as a candidate? Do you think she's doing better out there on the campaign trail than maybe some of her critics thought she was doing initially?
Yeah, I mean, she's definitely gotten into more of a groove than she had in the beginning. Remember, there were all those calls and articles about how the White House wasn't happy with the way that she was running the campaign, reporting that she wasn't making the fundraising calls that she needed to make. She is getting out fundraised. Fundraising numbers had come out. She's down again to Abigail Spanberger, but she is hitting a rhythm on the campaign trail that hadn't really been there earlier on in the campaign.
Fascinating to watch, you guys. Always good to see you. Rich Edson of New Jersey. Bryan Llenas has some New Jersey cred. Rich is watching Virginia, and Bryan is watching New Jersey. You guys are awesome. Thank you for your great reporting out there, and we'll be talking soon. Almost Election Day. Take care, guys. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Martha.
Of course. Thank you. Take care.
So that was a great look from two of our best reporters in our reporter roundtable today, getting ready for the big election as we head into Halloween. And then next week is election night. We're going to have full election coverage with our fantastic Fox election team, which Brett Barrett and I will lead on election night. So get ready to pop your popcorn and stay tuned for all of that big coverage next week. Thanks for joining me on The Untold Story. I'm Martha McCallum. We'll see you next time.